Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very pleased and very honored to have with us today Major Doron Spielman. Major Spielman holds the rank of Major in the Israel Defense Forces IDF Reserves, having served as an international military spokesperson. As spokesperson, Major Spielman conducted hundreds of interviews with major global news networks and outlets, including CNN, Fox News, NBC, ABC, BBC, and Sky News. Major Spielman is a graduate of the Churchill National Security Program, a senior fellow at the Herut Center in Jerusalem, and a graduate of the University of Michigan. For over 2 decades, Major Spielman served as vice president of the City of David Foundation and worked to transform the City of David into one of the world's most significant archaeological and historical sites. And today we will be discussing Major Spielman's forthcoming book, an absolutely fascinating read titled When the Stones Speak, The Remarkable Discovery of the City of David and What Israel's Enemies Don't Want You to Know. The book will be released May 13th and is available now on major bookstores. Amazon and the likes will be available in local bookstores in Israel and abroad, and urge all our listeners and viewers to go online and make that purchase. Major Spielman, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it very much.
Ari, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Getting started, what inspired you to write When the Stones Speak, and what central message or lasting feeling do you hope readers will take away from the book?
It's a good question. And as every good Jew, I've got multiple answers, but I'll give you just two because I actually wrote this book twice. It's a book that was written twice. The first time I wrote When the Stones Speak it dawned on me. I had been working in the city of David for 8 years at this point, and we had unbelievable discoveries, which maybe we'll get a chance to speak about, that prove the Bible. And we had already made a clear statement just from the discoveries underneath the ground that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. And we didn't need to say it, it was just very clear. And in response to that, there was a lot of excitement about the city of David, but there was also a group of people, which is not a small group of people. And today we see them in the streets chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and carrying out violent acts, that when they saw this happening, they saw the city of David as a threat. And unfortunately, one of the ways that they acted against the city of David was to try to use the media, the popular media, to frame the city of David as an evil demon colluding with the Israeli government as part of a Zionist scheme. And at one point, they even recruited 60 Minutes. And I got a call from 60 Minutes. This is a number of years ago. And I was asked to do an interview for 60 Minutes, which I agreed to do knowing who they are. But I had done my research and I knew that they had already spoken to Arabs in the area of the city of David. And so we made a decision. Let's give it our best shot. In any case, there'll be, millions of people that will see this and will attract them to the city of David. And essentially, Leslie Stahl, same old Leslie Stahl that exists in 60 Minutes today. She was on 60 Minutes back then. Leslie Stahl came to the site and I took her. She actually said to me, she said, I want you to know this is the first time in my journalism career that I am bringing my husband with me to a site he's so excited to see. So I gave them a pre-tour for about half an hour. He was crying. And Leslie was just blown away when I showed her the clay seals that match the book of Jeremiah. And then, of course, the camera goes on and Leslie's smile turns into a growl. And the entire piece was essentially an attempt to try to undermine the excavations in the city of David, only focusing on where there's not evidence, where there's not hard evidence. She never mentioned the clay seals that prove the Bible that her husband had cried about. And she interviewed Arabs from the neighborhood that could barely speak English, but she force-fed them food, in which their basic claim, which of course is uncorroborated and wasn't true, was that we are part of a Zionist regime and their lives are hell and the excavation site is just the Zionist ruse. So at the end of that episode, which, by the way, I will just say, fascinatingly enough, it showed me, I guess, what Trump knew just intuitively, the piece brought millions of people to the city of David, even though it was a hatchet job. And in fact, it was such a hatchet job, she was so biased that all the Jewish groups rose up against her, and anyone in their right mind could, it was transparent. They got it. It wasn't clever, it was transparent. However, at the end of this, Ari, I said to myself, you know what? The only way that this story is actually going to be told is if somebody writes a book about the story. And that's at first what I thought. I tried getting people to write books about the story, and some were interested. Some did some popular stuff, more, let's say, made for TV stuff. But no one wrote a serious piece about the city of David. And as time went on, and the behind the scenes battle over the city of David became very clear, I already realized, I would say 6 years ago, that the day would come when I have to put this on paper and give people the idea this is not just an archaeological site. It's not just about history. This is a front line in the battle. And that's how I came to the book. And that's why I wrote it. And I'll just tell you the second reason, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
The second time I went back and wrote the book was October 8th. On October 8th, by that point in time, in the morning of October 8th, I was already in between Sderot in southern Israel and the kibbutzim, where the fighting was taking place. And I was behind the frontline troops. And I was there scoping out, first of all, what was happening, obviously, and also thinking about the importance of bringing the media to this area to show them the disaster, which is my job in the Army as a military spokesman. So I was scoping it out, and I was on a road with hundreds of abandoned cars, just me and one other soldier and a group that was cleaning up the cars, if you can call it that. And I opened the door to a car, and I saw the driver's registration in the seat with blood in the seat, a baby seat in the back with blood in the seat. And I was holding his name up and just looking at this. And my fellow soldier, Liad, said to me, Doron, look what you're standing on. So I looked down, and I see I'm standing on a pile of white zip ties. You use the clothes. Liad, I said, what is this? Mazik. He said to me, the people in this car, at least one of them was taken hostage, and those were used to bind their hands. And I looked around me at all the cars, hundreds of cars. Just Liad and I, some were smoking on Firestone, and it looked like a tidal wave had swept through the area. And in fact, what does Hamas call this war? The Al-Aqsa flood. When there's a flood and the water comes in and it goes back out to sea, it litters the garbage. It looked like a flood had come through and receded, and what was left were these cars. And I looked and I said, it's clear. They're already calling it by October 8th, the Al-Aqsa flood. This is about Ir David. This is about Harabait. This is about the Kotel. This is about Jerusalem. The fight is over Jerusalem. And when I came back to the book, Ari, and I opened up the book, I had chills, because what the book is written about is the systematic undermining of the history of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And when I looked at it, I said, if only I had read this book, understanding what was going to happen. It's like a lead-in. If you erase a people's history, the next thing is you're going to try to erase the people. And that, Ari, was the second inspiration for writing the book.
Going back, and the various historical discoveries which you chronicle in the book, what was the Palestine Exploration Fund, which was sponsored by Queen Victoria, and what key discoveries did it make? Was this the beginning of the modern archaeological history of the city of David?
Yes, it was. It was probably the beginning of archaeology almost anywhere in the world. There were different governments, but Queen Victoria was the biggest proponent, who at that time were sending people who, there was no such thing as going to school and studying archaeology. You were essentially treasure hunters. And this is the original archetype of Indiana Jones. So Charles Warren, he's a captain in the Navy, a decorated captain in the Navy. He's tall and handsome, and he's got medals. And Queen Victoria appoints him the head of this fund. And the goal was to find the Ark of the Covenant, to find the treasures of Solomon, and bring them back to the empire, the British Empire, which at that point was at its height under Queen Victoria. And so she sends Captain Charles Warren. He was the most well-known, and he led the excavations in Israel. He comes to the Holy Land looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And just like in Indiana Jones, where does he go? The first place he goes is to the Temple Mount. And he tries bargaining with the Arabs, and they're out bargaining him, and they take his money, and they still don't let him dig. And eventually he catches on that that there's, that he has to negotiate here with what he is going to get. And so he says, well, what can I do? And they said, you cannot dig on the Temple Mount, but there's a wall that the Jews dig, that the Jews pray at. Go move the rabbis out of the way and go dig. Keeping in mind in 1867, the majority of the old city was Jewish by then. So he goes to the old city, moves the Jews out of the Western Wall, and you can see it today. The shafts that are going down at the Western Wall were created by Captain Charles Warren. So what does he do? He digs shafts straight down underneath the Temple Mount, and he's digging from the side now, down and from the side. And so it takes them a while to catch on, the Arabs, and he's pulling stuff out of the ground and shipping it back to England. It's in an archive in England to this day. In England, they're studying it. And there's no smoking gun. As a matter of fact, there's no ancient Hebrew writing. There's more modern stuff. I mean, modern Second Temple period. But he's disappointed he's not finding the Ark, and the pressure is kicking up with the Ottoman Turkish government. And Captain Charles Warren doesn't want to go back to England as a failure. So he's thinking about what to do. And he takes a walk outside the old city walls into a valley called the Kidron Valley, which is mentioned in the Bible. It's the eastern border of Jerusalem. And he's walking in the valley. And there's really nothing there except a small Arab village and a small Jewish Yemenite village and a spring of water. And he goes to the spring of water and he gets a drink. And he sees that he pays attention, the water's flowing into a mountain, not into a valley. So he decides to check it out, and he takes his torch with him, his lantern actually, which we have found his lanterns in various places, and he goes to the water, and he realizes it's full of mud and stuff, but it can be traversed. So he brings down his archaeological team, and they begin clearing mud out of this underground water tunnel and going through the dark and stooping over and crawling over. And he details this in his diary that at some point he has his pencil in his mouth and he's picking at something in the roof of the tunnel, and he starts to swallow his own pencil, and he says he almost died and someone had to save his life. I mean, it's like comedy Jones here. After around 50 feet, when you can see this today, he looks over his head and he sees a shaft going up, and he begins to scale the shaft, and he finds an underground tunnel which leads to an underground city. And when he begins to explore that underground city, he realizes very, very quickly that it is 2,000 years older than what he found at the Western Wall. And he does not understand why. Why is this bronze, which is a different time period, the Bronze Age than the Iron Age? Why is this so much earlier than the Old City? And at some point in time, we don't know exactly when, Captain Charles Warren matched a biblical inscription from the second book of Samuel, Shmuel Bet, Parakeh, chapter 5, where David is coming to Yerushalayim to capture it from the Yevusim. David is trying to find his way in. He offers a prize. Whoever will be the first person in will be my chief of staff, Yoav. We know from Divrei Yamim, Yoav from Chronicles is the first one to take up the mantle. And the only line, we know David captures Jerusalem, which hadn't been captured at that point since Yoshua came in the land of Israel, not clearly captured at least. There's multiple descriptions in Yoshua and in Shoftim, in Joshua and in Judges, but the only cryptic answer, and I'll just deal with the simple explanation of what this means, is it says, Vayomer David bayomahu. David says on that day, so the Bible saying, listen in, Kol Makai Yevusi vayga b'tzinor. The one who beat the Jebusites captured the gutter of the city. Now, Chazal, the sages, and people have been trying to figure this out for years. There's lots of different explanations. Captain Charles Warren is in this water tunnel, and he says, wait a second, like David captured Jerusalem through a water tunnel. And you know what? There's no water tunnel in the upper city of Jerusalem with water in it. Well, if there's a water tunnel here in this little village, then maybe Jerusalem's down here outside the walls. See, when you ask me what was the most significant discovery, hands down, that the Palestine Exploration Fund discovered, the actual discovery is that they discovered Jerusalem. And that's not what he expected. He expected to discover the Ark of the Covenant. He actually discovers this unbelievable thing, which is hard for us to imagine, that the oldest city of Jerusalem is not inside those walls. The oldest city of Jerusalem is down in the valley outside the walls in the city of David. What this does, Ari, is it sparks a slew of people sent by the Palestine Exploration Fund that want to pick up the torch and continue in Charles Warren's footsteps. And they do. And in fact, many things are found. But I will say this, that some of the most significant discoveries, including one that was made 13 years after Charles Warren, was found by a 15-year-old kid who was exploring the area. And if you want, I can explain that, as well.
Okay. Certainly, yeah, that absolutely, because that's part of the Palestine Exploration Fund story. So absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I go into a lot more detail about this in the book. It really is an unbelievable story. There's a young Turkish Jewish kid. His name is Yaakov Eliyahu, and he's an orphan, and he's shepherding sheep, it seems. And one day his sheep are drinking from a spring also in the city of David. It's the same spring on the other side. And while his sheep are drinking, he goes into the water tunnel, but from the opposite side, the exit of where Charles Warren is, and he's holding a torch. And he records that he walks in, this 15-year-old kid, and he stumbles in the water and he falls in the water, and the big splash. He's covered with water. He lifts himself up out of the water. And as he lifts himself up and his hands are on the walls, his hand feels something jutting out of the wall. And he tries to look at it, and he brings in a torch and looks at it, and he sees scribbles, which he very quickly realizes is Hebrew writing. This little boy, Yaakov Eliyahu, found the most important biblical inscription ever found, one of them, even probably today in Israel, although we found many other phenomenal things, which is the description that describes the same story that is written in the Tanakh, in the Bible, written that describes how Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, which is David's direct descendant, lives around 200 years after David, guards Jerusalem and protects Jerusalem from the onslaught of the largest army in the world called Assyria. And the Bible very, very clearly explains, the Tanakh very goes into detail, that the way he does this is he creates a water tunnel that brings the water inside the city of David. And lo and behold, this ancient inscription written in ancient Hebrew says, it describes in ancient Hebrew, early biblical Hebrew, how a water tunnel was built on the site and how it was built, and that two different teams met from different sides. And so the Ottomans, everyone's hungry for treasure. The Ottoman Turks very quickly take that plaque. It's in the Istanbul Museum to this day. I've seen it. It's there. It's on display, and it's amazing because this boy described he found something that matches the Bible, and then you find inside. And the king of Assyria has his own record of the exact same event, which is also in the British Museum, where he describes the same encounter. He, of course, describes it as a great victory, because actually he doesn't. He describes it as he's describing all the nations he beat with a massive victory. When it came to Hezekiah, he says he trapped him in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. He doesn't actually say he beat him, probably because he didn't. We know he didn't. And it would be absurd for him to say that, because his own people would say, well, you didn't. So he said, oh, I trapped him, and then I left, which also makes sense with the story of the Bible. So that is also part of that same period. The transition from the Palestine Exploration Fund onwards was really when Baron Rothschild came to the scene.
Okay. And Baron Rothschild, of course, is famous for acquiring land in the land of Israel. We see all of his contributions to Israel throughout history. Why did Baron Rothschild, why did he get interested in the city of David? Why did he purchase land there? What was his goal? Where was that coming from?
So there is a different, Baron Rothschild purchased the city of David for two reasons that we know, because this is recorded. The first reason is what you were just saying, Ari, which is he was interested in buying land in Israel. He felt this was the key. And the city of David was strategically located directly outside the Dung Gate, Shar Hashpot. And he felt it was a land grab, and it would be a great place for a Jewish community to spring up. He understood that. That was one thing. However, somewhere along the way, Chaim Weizmann, the first president of the state of Israel, outside of Herzl, the most important person with the modern founding of the state of Israel, along with Eliezer ben Yehuda, the founder of the modern Hebrew language, come to Baron Rothschild. And they say to him, listen, you need to make this a top priority because the archaeological excavations that have been done here by the Gentiles, by the Goyim, have already begun to uncover our roots. And if we're going to build a country here, this is the, if Rome has the Forum and Greece has the Acropolis, this is the Jewish people's proof. And they go back and forth and they convince him. And it's very cute because there's a letter that Chaim Weizmann writes to Rothschild explaining to him all of the great archaeology. They bring in a Jewish archaeologist, the first one ever to excavate in Israel, Raymond Weil, and who was a great archaeologist, and he's digging. And Weizmann's very excited because Weil thinks he uncovers the graves of David and Solomon. And Rothschild writes back and basically calls him a fool. And he says, you're a fool. I'm buying this because it's the land grab. You can have your archaeology, but And so Baron Rothschild, there was a mixture of ideas. He certainly understood, and it's interesting because it's a premonition of how smart that man actually was. He realized early on that the actual location of the city of David would be incredibly strategic for Jewish sovereignty around the old city. And as we know in the city of David, that is much of the story around the city of David, the strategic location of the city of David, in addition to its archaeological importance.
You write, Major Spielman, about the archaeological destruction of the Temple Mount. What does that mean? And what did that reveal about the Temple Mount and the city of David?
Well, it's clear now to many people, and I don't know if your audience is aware, that there's one side in archaeology in Israel that wants to dig because they want the truth to come out. That is everybody essentially that's not a Muslim fanatic. Okay, Jews, Christians, your average person is fascinated by archaeology. The whole world is fascinated by archaeology, and they want to know what's beneath the ground. However, there is another side, which is the leadership of the Palestinians, which have been pushing this narrative very, very clearly. It was even said this week by Mahmoud Abbas, again, the head of the Palestinian Authority, that he has said this week that the temple is in Yemen, as if the Houthis have our temple. And this has been an ongoing campaign going all the way back to the founder of Palestinian movement, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was one of Hitler's closest comrades and was hoping to carry out the final solution in Israel. From that point on, they begin to mess with history. And so they realized early on, as Israeli sovereignty grows, they are very fearful of all excavations. In 1996, the Waqf, which is the Palestinian Authority, Hamas's arm in the Temple Mount, decided to build a mosque on the Temple Mount. And they made lots of threats against Israel. And under duress, essentially, political duress, afraid of a riot breaking out, Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to let them do this. And he conditioned it on many, many conditions. He said there has to be archaeological supervision. It can only be this and this big. But he did allow them to do this, and they began to erect this mosque. Prime Minister Netanyahu loses the next election, and Ehud Barak comes in. And Ehud Barak is a scaredy cat, and he doesn't care much about these things, as we find out, because he was very much willing to give all of them away not long afterwards. And the Palestinians begin to blast through walls and dig a massive crater inside the Temple Mount. And Barak does nothing. The Shin Bet, the Shabak, as we call them in Hebrew, which is Israel's national security service, which knows everything happening everywhere, does nothing. And over the course of 3 weeks, Palestinian Authority sends dozens and dozens of truckloads and empties, sit in your seat here, 15,000 tons of archaeological earth out of the Temple Mount. And the first third, they were very thorough. They dumped in a garbage dump and had it mixed with garbage, lost forever. The second 2/3, they were a little bit lazy, and they began dumping them in piles along the Kidron Valley, thinking that they were going to run out of time. So you have these big piles. Finally, eventually, Dr. Eilat Mazar, who plays a key role in our story, she's a modern archaeologist, notices that the southern wall of the Temple Mount, which is the same holiness as the western wall, right? It's the same wall, just on the southern side. In fact, probably holier in terms of it's not as close to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but it is the original entrance. So it's at least this holy. She sees the wall is bulging outward. How can a wall that's been fine for 2,000 years bulge outward? And she realizes, well, if you've got a lot of pressure on top of the Temple Mount, always, and someone takes fill out of it, what happens if you have a box that's full of sand, and then you remove the sand and there's weight on top, it bulges outward. So she says, wait, something's happening here. She raises the red flag. And finally, Israel steps in and freezes everything on the Temple Mount. And around 3 weeks later, an archaeologist is going through the Kidron Valley. I talk about this in the story. He was arrested and freed. I mean, the irony here is incredible. He uncovers these piles of archaeological waste and begins sifting through them. And I spent not a small part of my life sifting through these and also helping fund the excavation with the city of David. Unbelievably, my daughter, when she was 8 years old, in the excavation, found a hieroglyph, a very small hieroglyph, which says in ancient Egyptian, Tut Moshe, Tut Moses. Tut Moses, same word as Moses. Tut Moses is the relative of Ramses II, which is the pharaoh of the Exodus story. He comes before him, found on the Temple Mount. How it got there, there's a lot of different theories. But essentially what happens is the largest archaeological crime on earth was carried out on the Temple Mount. And what that did, when I came to the city of David in 2002, so 23 years ago, I knew this story. It's one of the reasons I came. And I was so rattled by this and ashamed that this happened under Israeli sovereignty that when I came to this little excavation called the City of David, I felt very, very committed to be part of something to ensure that would never happen again. And it essentially set into motion an idea, which was a painful wake-up call. If Jews are not in charge of archaeological sites, you can kiss them goodbye. And one of the most important points in hand is the tomb of Joseph, which is located in Nablus, Shechem, which is a tomb that goes back, such a long time, has been defiled numerous times. The Jewish synagogue in Gaza had a very large Jewish community. I've been in Gaza 4 times in the last war. I went out of my way to tell the international press that in Zaytun, which is an area, a city to the east of Gaza from which the border settlements were attacked from, Zaytun had a larger Jewish community, according to Ottoman records, than it had a Muslim community. So that synagogue was also severely damaged. And so that is what I mean by the destruction of the Temple Mount. Unbelievable blight on Israel's responsibility protecting our holy sites.
So in 1967, Six-Day War, Israel captures Jerusalem, the Old City, Eastern Jerusalem. When do the new archaeological efforts begin to uncover the city of David? Just take us through a little bit of the chronology, how it happened, perhaps some of your personal stories where you had to crawl through tunnels and all that amazing stuff.
Sure. So first of all, 1967, Israel comes back. Baruch Hashem, Six-Day War. After 6 days, we come back. And we're very quickly focused on the Jewish quarter of the Old City and clearing the area around the Western Wall, where the city of David, since it was privately held by Baron Rothschild and the Jewish National Fund, they knew that there was private Jewish land over there, but it had been heavily populated with Arabs in those last 19 years. And they kind of just said, okay, let's wait for that later. In the late 1970s, there was a series of excavations that began in the city of David. They uncovered incredible discoveries. However, it was outside the old city walls in an Arab village. Nobody had reinforced the Rothschild deeds, and therefore the excavations quickly ended. Almost nobody went to visit them. And they were pretty much, that was going to be the end of the city of David. We'd have lost ancient Jerusalem until the mid-1980s. In the mid-1980s, there's a unit in Israel today, but it's very well known. It's called Duvdevan. Duvdevan is an undercover unit. Became famous from a TV show that's called Fauda, but it's undercover Jews that are going in and capturing terrorists, and they were operating in this village, having no knowledge whatsoever. There's an archaeological site there. There were Arabs living there that were involved in terror, specifically throwing stones at Jews leaving the old city. And so the commander of this place, his name was Davidala, which means little David. And they have informants. One of his informants tells him, you know that Jews used to live here, and there's excavations here. There's an archaeological site, and he brings him to show him some. Davidala was, national religious. He grew up studying the Bible, is blown away. Like, wow. So he does some research, and he sees that Baron Rothschild uncovers the deeds and that they had all been rewritten in the names of the Arabs. And he basically says to himself, how is this possible? Well, we're going to give the very cornerstone of the whole reason that Jews came back to Israel. Zionism is very, very based on the whole idea of Zion, which is the fortress that David conquers in the city of David. And so he dedicates his life to recreating the city of David. He hired me in 2002. The word hire is kind of funny. There was no formality to it. I was an IDF spokesman and working in high tech, and a friend introduced me to him. And I was so blown away even by his initial excavations that were of the Gihon Spring, the area near where Charles Warren entered the drainage, the water system, that essentially he said, I need help. And I said, okay, how can I help? And it was a very informal way to start working, but that's how it began. And that's how I came to the city of David. And that is really what launched the major launching of the excavations took place, began in 1996, but I would say really 2002 onwards is where we had a major, major push. There's a lot of stories where I was crawling and discovering, but I will share one in particular. The one in particular that I'll share is based on a sewage leak. And again, the book details this, and I have pictures of this in the book. It was probably the most blessed sewage leak in the history of mankind. So there's a sewage leak in the southern area of the city of David, a pipe burst, and the city comes in to fix it. And while they're coming to fix it, they're digging with their tractor, and they uncover a stone stair. And they call him the archaeologist. The archaeologist, Eli Shukran, goes and checks it out. He calls Davidala. I'm next to Davidala. Davidala and I are in Ramat Eshkol. Some of your listeners are probably maybe from there. And we go to the city of David. We drive in our cars, and we see a tractor whose crane is in the air. Eli Shukran, the archaeologist, very angry that the tractor had destroyed part of the stair, and he's on his hands and knees cleaning a stair. So we get on our hands and knees and start cleaning a stair. And Jews in the neighborhood clean the stair, and Arabs are coming. I mean, it was like the Mashiach, Messiah was here. Jews and Arabs are all working together to uncover biblical Jerusalem. And like the last line, V'nei Amar, it's like you could just imagine I'm looking around like, wow, okay, it's Gola. And basically what we understand is the stair is massive. It's 180 feet wide. And there ends up being 16 of them. And they go down into a pool, which we are now excavating. It's a massive, massive, massive mikvah. And why did you need such a big mikvah? Of course, because this wasn't your average mikvah. This was the mikvah that you went into before you went into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple. And we're uncovering this pool, but there's a problem when you find a mikvah, right? If somebody goes into a mikvah and they're tahor and they're pure, and they touch anybody who's tamei, who's impure, so then it's like you never went into the mikvah in those days, right? And so you have a massive ritual pool, a mikvah, about half a mile from the Temple Mount, from the temple. Now, what are the likelihood you're going to have to dance your way through, trying not to touch anyone? And so the archaeologist Ronnie Reich says, listen, if this is the mikvah, there's going to have to be a road that took the people from this place directly to the temple. And we found the beginning of a road, and we were very, very excited. But pretty soon, the beginning of this road hits a pile of dirt that is 40 feet high, and there are homes on top and neighborhood on top. And we realize, okay, this isn't going to be easy to dig this road. Basically, you're going to have to support an entire city over your head and dig through it. And no one in the world had done this. Rome tried this, and it took them years, and they're still doing it. And it was very difficult to, how do you even begin to convince the city or raise money if you don't really see that it's continuing? You just find a few little paving stones. And I got a call from Eli Shukran. This is about a month after we found this little piece of the road. And he says, listen, I found a tunnel that goes under the road. So think you have a road like Fifth Avenue or whatever else, and underneath it, you've got the sewer that's going in it. So he said, look, we can go underneath the road maybe, or underneath what we found, and we won't disturb anything over our heads. It's like crawling through a culvert. So five of us go into that tunnel. We brought one of our donors with us. It's a very, very funny story, an incredible adventure how I got stuck there. And but as we're crawling and at the end of this tunnel where you're crawling on your stomach, we reach the underside of a staircase. And so we confirmed underneath the ground, you're in a sewer underneath the road. And we confirmed that the road is continuing underneath this fill over our heads, going all the way up. And it was an incredibly exciting moment because we found the road of the pilgrimage, the Ole Regel. We were underneath it, cramped together. Now, I want you to imagine this. We're wearing head flashlights. I mean, it's dark. It's creepy beyond belief. It's I mean, you cannot imagine. No one had been in there in 2,000 years. And we're talking, and there's like a glow, like kind of like the flashlights glowing off the stones. And I'm looking at Eli Shukran as he's explaining things. And all of a sudden, he looks down to the side and he's digging. And he goes, guys, look at this. And we go over, and he's pointing at the dirt. And inside the dirt, there's the top of a vase, of a jug. And he's like, he's digging with his finger around it. He's like, I think this is intact. How can it be inside a sewer that there's an intact, who's hanging out in a sewer? And it was so bizarre. We're looking at it and looking at it, and he's cleaning it out, and it's completely found two intact jars beneath this sewer beneath the road. And we're looking at this, and Eli Shukran says, I have an idea. This was confirmed later. Around the time of the destruction, the best record we have is Yosef ben Mattityahu, Josephus. Josephus writes in the Book of Jewish Wars, describes very clearly the destruction of the temple. After things are destroyed, there are 2,000 Jews, the elderly and the young, that were left behind in the city. And they realize that if they stay there, the Romans are going to kill them. And so they try escaping, he says, via the Siloam, like the tunnel under the Siloam Valley. And they're going down, trying to escape via this gutter that we were in. And he writes, at some point, he says, the Romans heard where they were, and they tore open the road to get to the sewer beneath, and they killed almost all of them. Some had asphyxiated, and some they sold into slavery. And that was the last record of Jews in Jerusalem for 2,000 years. And here we are inside this tunnel, and we realize that we're at the very location the Jews had hid and were caught by the Romans. They had brought food with them in these clay jars. Afterwards, we found the most unbelievable discoveries that I go through in the book that show what they were minting, the coins they were minting, and how they were surviving. And it's one of those moments, I've had a number of them, thank God, but it's one of those moments where you ask yourself, what were these Jews thinking at that last moment? Like we have Tisha B'Av, the ninth of Av every year, but like you come so close to it that I feel there's a chibur, there's a connection with the way that they're thinking about the destruction and your life, and you feel like you're sitting in the same place together. And it's an unbelievable, unbelievable experience. I've had a number of experiences like that.
Okay. How have the discoveries, the stones, as they're called, helped refute what you call the minimalists and skeptics, the ones who refute the existence of King David and his palace?
Well, the skeptics in Israel, it's important to say, we're talking about Jews, Jewish, which is no great surprise. And I love our people, but these are Jewish professors that come mostly out of Tel Aviv University that jumped on a bandwagon that began in Europe that was based on anti-Semitism in Copenhagen, but they basically had a view which is, it was politically motivated as well, that the Torah cannot be true. There's no way, this book cannot be valid. You cannot use it for morals and ethics. You cannot use it for history. and you can't use it for archaeology. And what grew out of this was almost an absurdity, which was there's a common dating system that goes back to the time of King David, and they date everything differently. They just say everything is 200 years later, which essentially takes you, in many cases, out of the biblical period. So at first, the minimalists said there was no David. It's a myth, King Arthur. However, and they wrote books about this, led by Professor Israel Finkelstein. They wrote books on this. However, unfortunately for them, or if they have any intellectual integrity, fortunately for them, in northern Israel, there's a site called Tel Dan, in which an inscription was discovered that says on it, and this is from within 100 years after David, it doesn't only say David, it says the dynasty of David. And so if 100 years after someone, there's a dynasty in their name, then clearly that person existed. And so then they said, okay, there's a David, but yeah, he didn't really have the city of David. There's this old city, the city of David. Jews lived there at some point, but you can't go back to this time period. Dr. Eilat Mazar, her grandfather was a very well-known archaeologist, and he was not part of the school of thought. And before he died, she discussed with him the discoveries that had been made in the city of David, some of them pre-war. And she said, I think the palace of King David is there. And he said, I think you're right. So Eilat Mazar walked into my office in 2004, and she took out a picture and she showed us a diagram of where our office was sitting and a pillar head that had been found 20 years before that matched architecture and archaeology of the Phoenicians, which is King Hiram. And in the Torah, in the Bible, King Hiram is the one who builds David's palace. She said, look, King Hiram built David's palace. He was Phoenician. We have a Phoenician pillar head. You have to let me dig. So the archaeologist, by the way, said you'll find nothing there. There's been excavations in that area. The ground level's there's almost nothing to dig. Lo and behold, she digs down next to my office. She hits a structure which is layered with pottery. So you've got pottery underneath the structure, which predates it, and pottery within. The pottery beneath the structure goes back to the Jebusites. And the pottery within the structure, Dr. Mazar says, well, it goes back to David. And the minimalists say, no, it doesn't. It's 300 years after David. Now, even 200, 300 years after David is still amazing if you're talking about any history, but Jews like to argue. And so here we're arguing over 200 or 300 years. So it's either 700 BCE or 1000 BCE. And they're coming very strongly out against her. And she finds one olive pit at the time. And she sends the olive pit off to Oxford, and the fighting continues. The olive pit comes back a month later from Oxford, independent analysis, and says that it is organically dated to 1000 BCE, which is Bul, the time of David. Now, the archaeologists are even more annoyed, some of them, and some are more excited. And Dr. Mazar continues digging, and very logically, you have to imagine we lock the White House right now. I'm going to say everyone out. You lock the White House. And someone comes 2,000 years later to the White House and unlocks it, and they walk in. And whose stuff are they finding there? Which president's pens and pencils and, I don't know, underwear and socks are they finding? Not George Washington's. They're finding Trump's. So what happens is we come all these years later, and the King David was a successful king. This palace was in use. The foundations go back to David, but it was in use for 400 years. So when we unlock the door, what we find were the stuff of the last person who lived there, which is King David's direct relative, Zedekiah. And in the palace, she finds 2 clay seals with names on them, Yuchal ben Shlemaiah and Gedaliah ben Pashur, who are 2 of the ministers of Zedekiah that are well known because they tried to kill the prophet Yirmiyahu. Prophet Jeremiah. She finds these in the palace. So what do you have? You have a palace, a structure whose foundations go back to the time of King David, and it was used all the way down to the time of Zedekiah. Now, there was still skepticism, unbelievably, and there wasn't enough carbon dating, this and that, so we did something very wise a few years ago. We said to Tel Aviv University, you know what? Come and dig. And God bless them. They took us up on the offer. And they came and dug a site right next to King David's palace. And via digging that site, archaeology has developed and science has developed And now you can carbon date things you could not carbon date before in Eilat Mazar's times. And they found another 100 samples that could be carbon dated inside this area. And they're very cute because they say, okay, they've been dated. I met with Yuval Gadot, the from Tel Aviv University, says they're dated. I said, to when? Between 900 and 1100 BCE. I said, Yuval, what's between 9 and 11? 10. I said, you mean the 10th century? Just say the word 10th century. So he writes an article which says the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction. Essentially, you cannot ignore, and this was Eilat Mazar's line, and this is the line I put on the book, when the stones speak. I took the line because Dr. Eilat Mazar, her answer to the minimalists was always, you know what, let's just stop arguing. Let the stones speak. And today, the minimalists are in a funny position. I don't know, Ari, what they're going to do because they built an entire career on this. But Yuval Gadot has a lot of intellectual integrity, and I definitely, and I appreciate him. He made some statements which were clearly wrong in his early career, but he's the one, that's slowly turning around. And I think that what you're seeing, and this is part of a much longer discussion I go into, which is based on other archaeological sites, the stones are speaking. And the more the stones speak, the more and more clear it is that what the Bible is saying is true. You have nothing that is controverted the Bible. And it's just a matter of the way that people are skeptics operate is that when you don't find something, so clearly it didn't exist. And that's what Leslie Stahl, if you don't find King David sneakers that say King David, which he wasn't writing on his sneakers, and Jews they were writing religious things, they were not like just promoting themselves, then he didn't exist. Until you find one inscription in the north, all of a sudden he exists. So I think that the work is being done for us, and it's being done. Just all you have to do is dig.
Is there a favorite artifact that you were involved in discovering, or that you have taken out of discovered in the city of David that has special meaning for you personally?
It's like choosing your favorite, as we like to say, your favorite family member. But
We do that all the time. Okay.
right. There is. There is. And interestingly enough, it's not the seals, which are clearly directly from the Torah, from the Bible, like direct with names. So we were digging the pilgrimage road, and it was a harrowing experience. A lot of people tried to stop us. The Israeli left, the international extreme left, the Muslim Brotherhood. There was a lot of attempts of people's lives. I mean, anything to stop the excavations. And while all this was happening, we ended up continuing that excavation. And I was sitting in the offices of the city of David one day when Eli Shukran walks in. I'm having a meeting about discussing a model we were going to create. And he bursts in and he puts his hand on the table and takes it away. And inside his hand, there was a little plastic bag with like a clump of dirt. And he says, Nissim just found this. So I'm looking at the bag, and he opens it up, and he takes out like this clump of mud, and he puts it in my hand. And he says, no, Spielman, what is this? And I'm looking at this thing. I see it looks like there's gold inside of it. So I thought like maybe it was like an earring or something. I'm like, I don't know. Like, is this an earring? He's like, listen, hold it up to your ear. And I do. And he says, shake it. So I shake it. And as I'm shaking it, I hear a chime, a bell going off. And I said, Ellie, what is this? It's a bell? He says, He says, where do you hear about a bell in the Torah? I'm thinking, bell. I'm like racking my brains for bells. And it just didn't dawn on me at the moment. Maybe it should have. But he says, no, Shmot, he's saying Exodus, like think about Shmot, think about the high priest, think about the Kohen HaGadol. And finally, wait a second. The Kohen HaGadol, of course, on the rim of his garment, it says that he had pamon rimon. He had bells and pomegranates on the hem of his robes. I said, are you telling me this is the golden bell? And he says, listen, in all of the excavations in Israel, a golden bell has never been found. This was not only found It was found directly next to the Temple Mount, where it would have fallen through a sewer gate grate into the tunnel below, and it was just now pulled out of the ground. And after we cleaned it up, it was such a unique discovery, and it's pure 24 karat gold that even the skeptics and even the Israel Antiquities Authority, when the press release came out, no one could but say that this is most likely the golden bell that was affixed to the hem of the robe of the high priest. And for me, I guess it's so small and was found, the chances of it having torn off his garment and gone through the sewer gate, great. And then be found by a Jew named Nissim 2,000 years later is just as stuck with me. And it just shows how things are alive. Things never were not alive, even with the Khorban, even with the destruction. These things were waiting, just waiting.
Powerful, very powerful. What's next for the City of David project? What future discoveries might we see? And for you personally, what's next for Major Doron Spielman as it relates to the City of David?
Well, the City of David, we spent a lot of our years of time battling opposition that ranged all the way from violent terror movements, all the way reaching the State Department and even a White House under President Obama, who personally came out against us, and how we managed to persevere. In the light of this, we owe to many people. And the perseverance is really the answer to your question, because when you ask what's next, after years of fighting, we are now dealing with an administration and an Israeli administration. The Israelis are more bold, but certainly they are reinforced by the new United States administration. Yesterday, I was with Ambassador Huckabee, and I had the first sit down with Ambassador Huckabee yesterday. The first was on Fox, where he had a show when he was at the Western Wall, and the second I sat with him yesterday for 10 minutes, and it's coming out. And I was speaking with the ambassador, and I was joking with him. I said, last time I saw you, ambassador, you came to the City of David, and I was ready to guide you, and I had my guiding book, and you just led the tour. And I said, I followed you. And he was laughing because he knows, he's one of these Christians, he knows the Bible back and forth. But I gave him my book, and he gets it, and they get it. And so what's happening now is the resources and the ability to dig the City of David without constantly being disturbed is in our hands. And so we are able to make great, great progress. What's happening right now in the City of David, which I think is the most outstanding moment that is going to take place in the next number of months over the next year, is that same pilgrimage road that we found way back when, underneath that tunnel that was over our heads, and that we began to dig, and then it was stopped in the Supreme Court of Israel, and we continued. That pilgrimage road that our ancestors took we're between Pesach and Shavuot, right? So this is exactly the time. That actual road is being dug, and it will go all the way from that mikvah, from the Siloam pool, and it will bring you directly to the Sharim, to the gates of the Temple Mount of Har HaBayit. So all that's left afterwards is to open up, and that will happen over the next year, and it will be the most tremendous archaeological, not only discovery. This isn't something for a museum. You need to go there and walk on it. And my book gives the whole background on the different stops along the way. I mean, this is the penultimate experience of Judaism. And that is what the City of David has above it, has ahead of it, along with a lot of other excavations. And I think it's coming at the right time. It's very interesting. You asked me what's next for me. Well, yeah, I didn't expect October 7th. Unfortunately, I guess none of us did. And it has thrust me into certain positions that I did not anticipate being in. I was called in on October 7th, and I've spent on and off over the past year, hundreds of days in the military speaking to the foreign press. When I'm not in the military, I'm being called on right now to deliver a message about Israel, which is really the same message that I'm delivering about the City of David, which is, at the end of the day, the message of that the Jewish people are the indigenous people in the land of Israel. And I believe that that knowledge for Jews and for non-Jews is absolutely critical. You cannot skip it. We are not here because of the Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration was a wonderful thing that Lord Balfour did, and the San Remo Conference, and the 1948 war that was won. But that's not why we're here. That's not why we've hung on for 2,000 years. We've hung on 2,000 years because a Jew cannot live outside of his land forever. And we are the ultimate indigenous person. And right now I'm involved in a lot of different projects. The most important one is the book, which I'm going to be traveling and speaking on major news networks in 2 weeks' time to get the message out. And I'm also have my own podcast called True East. And there's a lot of other things that are cooking right now. And I feel like this is a time, like what you're doing as well, Ari, with this incredible series. This is a time to reinforce the spirit, the neshama of the Jewish people and people all throughout the world, because this is our enemies know this is the fight, right? They clearly know it's all about Jerusalem. They know it's the Al-Aqsa flood, the flood over the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so I see myself right now serving the Jewish people and carrying forth that message for the foreseeable future. And we'll see where that leads me and us and, the Jewish people.
Okay. Again, we urge all our listeners and viewers, when the stones speak, the remarkable discovery of the city of David and what Israel's enemies don't want you to know, available online, will be available in all bookstores, whether in the United States, Canada, Europe, and here in Israel. And urge all our listeners and viewers to go online and check out Major Spielman's podcast and all of his writings. And wish you continued success with the book and all of your endeavors. You continue to go from chayil to chayil, from strength to strength, and there's so much more we can talk about. But this is the end of this interview. And again, thank you so much today, Major Spielman. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. It's been a great honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.